My name is Rebecca Lowell, and I'm with the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. Bellevue University is sponsoring the Nebraska Vietnam Veteran Memorial Foundation and the Veterans History Project. I'm here at Bellevue University Military Veteran Service Center with Air Force veteran David Teer. He has agreed to share his story for the projects. So David, let's start with your full name and where you were born.
My name is David Charles Teer, and I was born in Detroit, Michigan. I lived in a government housing project until I was almost 9, and then we moved north, just north of Grand Rapids, where I went to high school.
Okay, and tell me about your family.
I have 2 brothers and a sister. Both of my brothers were in the Army. They were drafted while I was in the service, and because I was in Vietnam, they weren't allowed to go. One of them went to Texas. My other brother, Corky, well, actually his real name is Freeman, was stationed at Neu-Ulm in Germany, and he was a licensed plumber. And an interesting story, he walked in to sign in, and the first sergeant asked him if he played basketball because my brother is 6'4". And my brother said, "Oh yeah." And they took him down to the gym, gave him a tryout, and he said, "Your assignment's been changed. You're going to be a training clerk instead of field tech." Because they wanted him on the squadron basketball team.
Okay.
But anyway, and I learned that one of my extension leaves that I took when I was in Vietnam, I flew over from Saigon to Bangkok, from Bangkok to Munich, Frankfurt, Germany, went down, spent a week with my brother, flew to London, and then flew from London to Los Angeles, and then back across the Pacific. Took me 28 days, and it was a really fun time.
Okay. Are you the oldest, youngest, or do you
I
fall in
am the
middle?
oldest.
Okay. And how did your parents feel about you joining the service?
That's a good question. When I graduated from high school, I was 17, and my friend Victor Tisdall, was bugging me about joining the Air Force because he wanted to go into the Air Force and he wanted to join on the buddy system. And so I kept saying, "Vic, I can't go in, I'm only 17. And one day in August, Vic was with his recruiter who was bugging him about going in. He said, "I want to go in the buddy system, but my friend who's going to go in with me is only 17. And the recruiter said, "His parents can waive that." I came home from town. I'd gone down to see a friend, and there was a blue car, and there was Vic's car and my parents' car sitting in the driveway. I wandered into the kitchen, and there, sitting around the dining room table, was this wonderful group all smiling. And my mother says, "We've signed the waiver so you can go in at 17. And then, sign this," and my dad touched Mr. Belt, and I signed it. And they said, "Oh, next Thursday you're going down to Detroit for your physical." And so, I went on Wednesday. I stayed overnight with my grandmother. The next day, my grandfather dropped me off at Fort Wayne it was on Michigan Avenue in Detroit. And we went through all the things. I get to a scale, and I step on, and the doctor says, "Could you step off it for a minute?" And I said, "Yes." And I get off. He hands me these 3 big books, and he says, "Okay, now get back on." The needle comes up, He writes down 145. He says, okay, go on to the next station. At the end of the day, there's about 50 of us in this big room, and they come in and they call 10 names. And I'm thinking, oh, those are the guys that made it. So then they did some mumbling and jumbling, and then they took us out and put us on bus. We went back to the same train station I came in on, and about 30, 40 minutes later, I'm sitting there at the window, and I said, Vic, I haven't seen any signs for Lansing, figuring we were going back to Grand Rapids. And Vic says, we're in the Air Force. We're going to Texas for basic training. What? But anyway, that worked. And from there, I went through basic training. I went to Seymour Johnson, which is in North Carolina, a terrible place. The upside was living in the barracks and meeting some wonderful people. I was counting down to getting out of the Air Force, and they sent me to England, TDY, for 6 months. And I met some really nice people there. I was having a good time. They called me in one day and said, you've got two choices. You can agree to re-enlist and stay here, or go back to North Carolina. Well, it took me about 3 seconds to grab a pen and sign. From England, I went to Kinchlow Air Force Base, which is on the border between Michigan, Sault Ste. Marie, and Sault Ste. Marie, Canada. It was snowing the 1st of November, and I signed up for overseas as soon as I could. I left in the middle of July. I got on the bus at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it was 36 degrees. And from there, I had a leave, and then my orders got changed, which burned out all my leave and some other extra. I stopped in New Orleans, seen a friend from England who had been stationed with me. Went to California, flew to Vietnam, and then I met one of the best groups of people I've ever worked with. And I have a picture. I don't know if it's going to show that well. But this guy right here is his last name was Rogers, and everybody called him Buck Rogers because that's what he called himself. And I was still a two-striper because my career had been a little rocky because of some crazy people I worked with. And he got me promoted to sergeant, which I really appreciated. A really nice guy. And the rest of the people in this were all really nice people.
Good.
And Buck kept bugging me about moving off base. And I thought, no, I don't want to do that. Meanwhile, I met this other guy. We're going to show this picture. This is Lee Van Dong. He and I had a mutual interest in building model airplanes and remote control. And we built remote control car racers and stuff and had a really nice time. I wish I knew what happened to him. He was a really nice guy and we were good friends. And then the other people here, Rodriguez, which is one of the sergeant, there was 3 clerks in our office. We were a tactical control group and we ran We didn't do anything. We just typed stuff. But I worked for a couple of good captains, and they always gave me their stuff, and I didn't always type it, but I always read it and did the editing on it, and I thought, well, that was fun. And then they started giving me projects, which I thought was fun. And apparently they were treating me a lot higher than my rank was.
So you were in a combat support role.
Yeah. We did one of my favorite studies that we did. We had a mobile unit from the Philippines that was on an island that was full of prisoners of war and very few guards, and we wanted to get them out. So we did a study called the blip scan study that we put together and wrote up, and a week after we wrote it up, they were on the tarmac waiting to go back to the Philippines.
Wow.
Which we got things done in Vietnam, and that was the best part of it.
Okay.
The people, and I was on an inspection team once, and I went in, and the manuals were all out of date. So I went down to the pub office, and there was 2 on the shelf, and I said, well, that's out of date. Why haven't you given them to these guys? And they said, we're required to keep 2 on the shelf of everything. And I'm saying, wait, they've got a manual that's out of date, and there's 2 here, but you won't give it to them because you have to keep 2. The guy said, yeah.
Totally.
So I went back to Todd Sanute and went down to my pub office, got 2, and sent them out to him. and I think that was one of the good things that we did there, that we kind of avoided things. One of the other things that I did when I was there is I traveled all over Saigon.
Wow.
Because you're in a foreign country, you might as well explore and learn a little bit of the language. I still call it 20 Schwanzig. Oh wait, that's German, but never mind.
You know what you're talking about.
I know what it was. Anyway, one of my other favorite stories is we had there was a major, and his last name was Sales. I can't remember his first name. And we called him Soupy, not to his face, but anyway, he'd been there about a week, and he had a meeting in Cholan. And apparently somebody told him to come down and get me to drive because I knew where everything in Saigon was. And so we come down and we get in there and we go over to Cholan. He goes through the meeting. He gets back. We pull in the parking lot, and he gets out of the truck. And he says, "Thank you, Sergeant Teer, for taking me. If I ever have to go anywhere else, off base, I'm going to ask for you. But be assured that I'm going to drive."
Scary, huh?
Obvious. Well, it was a different driving experience. It's just the way the people were there.
Yeah. Okay. What do you, is there anything particular about Vietnam, a sensory thing that you always remember? Some people will talk about what it felt like after a rain. Some people will talk about a smell. Some people will talk about something.
During the first Tet Offensive, we had heard so many sirens that we were kind of lazy about getting out. of bed. And I was at the south end of the barracks in the upper bunk. And the sirens went off and we're like, oh, not again. And then there was this explosion. The very first rocket hit the base chapel, which was about 2 blocks north of us. And boy, did we get on the floor in a hurry. The next one went off across the street from the barracks. It was really loud, and it was close enough that the blast made me slide a little bit on the floor.
Wow.
And so then after the all clear, we get up, and my pillow is in shreds.
Wow.
A piece of shrapnel came through the door at the end of the barracks. Now, of course, I was in the upper bunk, went through my pillow and out the foot of the bed. Through the screen, there was a hole in the screen. I used to have a picture of it where one of my friends is holding the string that went through the window and the other one where it went through the door. But when I returned, my pictures and a lot of my stuff was sitting on the dock and got rained on. And by the time I picked it up here,
It was ruined.
it was ruined, yes. Fortunately, I still have lots of pictures left. And I think one of the things that I really liked is R&R. A lot of people, all the married people, went to Hawaii and met there. I got to go. I was one of the first to go to Australia.
Oh.
They had just opened up Sydney, and I loved it. It was beautiful. There was a family from the U.S. that was there working. They took us out on a sailboat on the harbor. I have lots of pictures of that. And then I went back. And then we had an extension leave. You could go 30 days and you could take an extension leave and they paid for you to go somewhere. So I extended and I went to Sydney for 28 days.
Oh, nice.
And on my way down there, I spent a weekend in Singapore, which got me to see some more stuff because I love traveling and seeing sights and doing things. And I really appreciate that part of it. And then I came back, and the next extension tour, I left Saigon in the morning, flew to Bangkok, spent the day in Bangkok, actually went bowling.
Oh, wow.
The bowling alley in Bangkok was the strangest one I've ever seen because they had so much oil on the lanes, there was almost a wake behind your ball as it rolled down to the other end. Then at midnight, I left Bangkok. It was 80 degrees. And
What time of year was it?
it was just before. Actually, I was supposed to have left a week later, but a week later was the Tet. When Tet was coming up, my boss said,
No leave.
go early. And so it worked out. We left at midnight. It was 80 degrees in Bangkok. This is in February. And we landed in New Delhi, Tehran, Lebanon, Ankara, and then I landed in Frankfurt. Fortunately, in Frankfurt, the train station is under the airport, under the terminal. And so I went down and got on the train, went down to Nui Ulm, and saw my brother, who was stationed there at the time, who was in the army. And it was like 14. and I've got basically a sweatshirt. But and then my brother wasn't there because I'd left a week early. He was down in the Alps as a ski ranger volunteer. And my brother had some really tough times when he was in the Army. And then, but his friends took me in. And then I was wandering around. I met this captain that had been in my organization in Vietnam, and he invited me and my brother over for dinner with his family. And we went over and had a really nice dinner. And then after dinner, he told my brother that I was the best boss he ever had. Now, I was a sergeant, and he was a captain. I thought, well, that's really weird.
But NCOs run the service.
But anyway, then I flew from there, and I spent a week in London with friends from 1963 when I was stationed in England. And actually, I'm still friends with. Strangely enough, it's the upside of media.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still in touch with a lot of people. People I worked with in England, almost every base but Seymour Johnson. But I flew from London then to Los Angeles and spent a week with my cousins, and then flew back to Vietnam, and took me 28 days. Sorry, Jules Verne, but your book is fake. No.
Now, you mentioned that you traveled. You enjoyed, even in Vietnam, you were able to travel and stuff like that.
Yes, I went on R&R to Sydney twice. I went on leave twice. And twice a year we had an admin meeting in Bangkok.
Can't beat it.
And we stayed at the New Nana Hotel, which is where we had our conference. But I got to go out. There's a place in Bangkok, if you're ever in Bangkok in Thailand, go to Tim Lan, where they have native, or not native, but original folk dancing and stuff, and elephants you can ride, and it was fun.
Okay. Is there any negative parts about your time in Vietnam, aside from shrapnel in your pillow? I mean, that's not the thing. But do you have any negative memories of Vietnam?
Yes. Okay. After my pillow, I did move off base. I figured the base...
No more Target.
No more Target. And there was a couple living upstairs, and he was from service, and he went back home, and I started dating this girl, and we were going to get married. There were 3 pages, 8 by 14, of things you had to go through to get it done. I started working on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the first sergeant found out about it. The first sergeant didn't like me for some reason anyway. And he told me, don't do that, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so then I kept it pretty low profile. And then I got to a point where I had to go to the base chaplain. The chaplain was a Baptist minister, not that brands make any difference. And I went in, And he told me that it was sinful for people of different races to marry and all sorts of bigoted stuff that you'd never get away with today.
No.
I said, okay, I sign it. He signed the paper. What I didn't know was he was buddies with the first sergeant. So the first thing he does after I leave is call the first sergeant and say, you can't do that. Anyway, they put off base, off limits.
Oh.
And of course I went home. Him and Buck Rogers come out and got me because it was my day off and brought me back. So I had friends over at MacV, which was on the other side of the base, but you had to take a bus off the base and back on to get there. So I went over there to stay, and we're going to play cards and stuff. And Chief Rogers, nice guy that he was, says, you're probably just get a slap on the wrist, like pay early duty or something. Actually, I lost a stripe. Now, there's, down the road, there's a plus to that, okay? Then he convinced the commander that I'd been on in country too long, and they said, oh, you're going back to the States next week. And they sent me here to Offutt.
Okay. That was my next question, is do you recall when you were sent back from, from Vietnam? So, on your way back from Vietnam?
I spent a week in Japan,
Okay.
in Tokyo, because that gave me a chance to see Japan.
Okay. And what was it like when you landed back in America?
It was interesting because I left Japan excuse me, at 10 o'clock on the day that I left, and I landed in Hawaii at 6 o'clock in the morning on the same day. I went backwards, and then by the time I got to Omaha, it was only 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the same day that I had left at 10 o'clock from Japan, which was really quick. And that's the first time I had gone from west to east instead of east to west, other than my trip to England. But
so after you left Vietnam and got back here, how long did you stay in the service?
I stayed until 1980.
Okay, so you retired from the Air Force.
I retired from the Air Force.
Okay.
I came back, and I was supposed to go to a place that I had to get a really high top secret clearance, but because I'd been busted, they couldn't put me there, so they put me in the 343rd Reconnaissance Squadron. I was supposed to be working for this tech sergeant, but he picked me up at the airport, and the next day he was gone on retirement leave. But the boss, Colonel Jalevics, was a really nice guy.
Good.
And he had this nasty letter from the first sergeant in Vietnam telling him and he said, I don't care. He says, all I care about is what you do for me. Okay. And so I got my stripe back, the next promotion. I then made staff sergeant, ended up getting married, went back to, we went to Germany for 4.5 years. Now, my wife and I both love to travel. And we got to go to Ireland, England, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Austria, Liechtenstein, Rome. And it was kind of funny because when I signed in at Ramstein, standing there was Sergeant Rodriguez, who was on the end here in the picture. And I said, I couldn't bring my wife over from Omaha until I had a place to live. And he lived out, and there was a place in the bottom floor that was available. He took me out there, we signed it up, and 45 days later my wife was I picked her up at Frankfurt. We drove back it was the week before Memorial Day. Mm-hmm. And then Memorial Day we took a hop to London and stayed in London with friends of mine that I'm still friends with. And we stayed at their house in London. And so it all kind of comes back and back and back. When I was leaving Germany 4.5 years later, I ran into Dick Moraine, who was the major that worked with me there in Vietnam. And I took my car up to Bremerhaven and brought his back, and it's just like things work.
I've talked to a lot of different veterans. I'm a veteran myself. I don't think I've talked to any veteran who took advantage of his military service to travel as much as you have. I mean, and I think that's wonderful. That's what you got to do.
The first thing we did when we got to Germany was we took the base offered a class in conversational German, so you could ask where the restrooms were and how to get here or there. And so, yeah, we bowled the first year. My wife was on the committee to set up the end of year banquet. And there was a couple who were bent out of shape that we were having it off base. They'd come from the U.S. down to Frankfurt, or down to Ramstein, and had never left the base.
Wow.
And they'd been there almost 2.5 years. And I don't understand that. And one of the beauties of being in the military is the ability to travel, to go different places. And one of the things goes all the way back to Seymour Johnson is the barracks was mixed. And even in basic training, you got to meet people of other backgrounds and expand your knowledge and everything. And that's the real beauty of being in the Air Force.
Okay.
And I don't know, we went everywhere.
It sounds like you did.
Yeah.
Now, you still keep in touch with people from all of your travels?
When I was stationed in England, I shared an apartment with 4 other guys in Cambridge. And I carpooled there were a couple of lieutenants that lived about a block away from us. And I am still friends with Al Chapman.
Wow. Did you join any other veterans organizations, or have you found friends through other veterans organizations?
I'm on Together We Served, and I'm also a member of the VVFW club here we meet in Millard once the second Wednesday of every month. And it I try to keep touch. Every now and then I search for people. A lot of my friends from England have passed away because I'm really old.
I don't think that's it, but okay. Do you attend any reunions?
You know, I for a long time I wasn't a fan of reunions until I went to a high school reunion. It was about 10 years. I figured no one would even know who I am. And there's all these wonderful people telling me stories about things I did and how they remembered me and stuff, and it's amazing. And I think the person I'm oldest, well, maybe not, well, who's not related to me anyway, there's a guy named Bob Allen. When I was 9 years old and we moved from Detroit to Evans, which was an unincorporated village, and I went to a one-room schoolhouse, and Bob was one of the guys that lived there and was in that school, and we're still friends.
Nice.
And so it's, you know, your life is strange. And one of the interesting things, when I was at Kinchlow, I was only there 6 months, I worked for a guy named Richard Savage. And in 1980 something, my wife and I went to a 55 plus class reunion in Fremont, Nebraska. She went to Fremont Bergen, which is a small school, and I hear someone yell my name, and I turn around and it's Dick Savage. And he had graduated with her brother.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I mean,
that's a really small world.
and it gets smaller. We went to Egypt.
Okay.
And we were up in the Upper Aswan, walking through this little alley, and there was a group of American tourists coming toward us. And somebody yells Pat's name, and it was a girl that was in her class at Fremont Bergen.
Wow.
I mean, we'd come from Germany, but she'd come from the U.S., and there we were in the middle of nowhere.
Egypt.
And so, I guess, and it's, my wife took organ lessons, and then she passed away in 2018. And I was wondering what to do with her organ, and I went to Critchett's, and I met Laura, and now we're married.
And Critchett's is how you and I know each other.
And that's how we know each other. That's how this all gets started. So yeah, the world's a huge place and it's a small place at the same time.
Do you think because of all your travels and stuff like that, that you have obviously a global awareness, and does that, do you think that affects how you feel about the world being small or big or related or anything like that?
I think we're all brothers and sisters.
Okay.
And we should work together.
How would you say, being in the military, what are the long-term effects on your life? Besides the fact that you know people from all over the world.
Yes. I started taking classes because it was free at various universities, and my first one was in 1963 because one of my assignments before I went to the Air Police Squadron was at the education office, and I took a class from UNO, which is here in Omaha. And then I took classes and classes and classes at every base because it was
So was I.
available. And so then when I retired, I found out that you either have to be a high school graduate or have a degree. It was one of those things to get a job. So I ended up, actually, I went back for a whole semester and a half and got my degree. I had 279 hours. Because I discovered that my real love, which was recreational leadership, jobs were few and far between and they didn't pay very well. So I ended up in computer science. But that was one of the benefits. And then when I retired, I'd like to give a hands out to TRICARE for Life. I have probably made more in mopped up medical expenses than I ever have in retirement pay.
That's good though. Your wartime experience, has that affected the way you think of war? You know, especially now as we're looking at the different conflicts that are going around.
I kind of see war as the industrial complex making money.
That's okay.
I mean,
No, that's very real. Now, if when your video is out there on the local site or the Library of Congress site, and a young person, do you have any children?
I have 3 boys.
Okay. Your grandchildren are looking at your videos.
Okay.
Okay. What would you want them to know?
They want to know that joining the service and was probably the smartest thing my parents ever did.
Signing you up.
Signing me up. It changes your life.
Okay.
It made me more social. It showed me sides of other people's lives. And then I found out that, like, I guess one day when I was in basic training and I came back and there was this young African American sitting on his locker crying with a letter in his hand. And I went over to him and I said, can I help you? And he says, no, my girlfriend dumped me. And that's when you start thinking, wow, that's just like us. We're the same. Mm-hmm. We're people, we're all people.
We feel.
When I was at Seymour Johnson, we played cards on Friday night. And we'd order pizza in from off base. And when the guy knocked on the door, all the blacks got up and went in to the restroom, which there was 2 rooms and we shared a restroom. Mm-hmm. We'd go into the restroom. And after a couple of weeks of doing that, I said, why do they go into the restroom when the door knocks? And if they had answered the door, the guy would not have served them. They said, oh, I'm sorry, I've got the wrong room.
Wow.
And that really, really, how wrong was that?
The things that you've seen,
yeah,
positive and negative, they really affect the way you perceive things and the way you treat others.
Exactly.
Exactly. Have you told your story to your family?
Some of it.
Okay.
And right now, slowly but surely, I'm writing an autobiography called Dave's TMI.
I would love to read that.
And when I first started, I kind of wanted to start with, a list and a timeline and sort of stuff. And I got to a point where I have 5 volumes. One of them being the
That's
military
TMI.
service. Well, yeah. One of them being the service. I really think that at some point, after graduation, or maybe even between 11 and 12, everyone ought to go through basic training.
And there are some countries that do have compulsory
Well, yeah,
service.
Switzerland,
Right.
which has never been they're neutral.
Is there anything from your story that we haven't talked about that you'd like to add?
We had we had a tech sergeant that would go to lunch, and some days he'd come back, and some days he'd come back and be a little on sober. But because of his ethnic background, our boss would not do anything. And then one day, Soupy stops me as I'm coming back from lunch and starts asking me about this guy. And I'm not going to throw a guy I work with under the bus.
Right.
And he can tell that. And then 2 days later, we get another clerk, and Soupy goes, and this other guy goes to work with Soupy. And then my friend tells me, he says, he called him in, put his arm next to his, and he said, you go to lunch, you come back sober, because it doesn't make any difference.
Absolutely. And that part of that is the military has its standards, and
Right.
no matter what your background is, when you're in the military, you adhere to those
standards. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
My other Dick Moraine, who was a major, it was about a half-mile walk to the post office every day. And there was only one side of the road that had a sidewalk. And everybody went up at lunchtime to check mail. And every day, Dick carried this huge box, and it had labels on it and stuff. It looked like it was going to be mailed. And every day he came back with it. And so finally one day I said, Dick, why do you take this box up if you never mail it? And he says, well, if you're carrying it in 2 hands, you can't salute anybody.
There's always a way to get around something.
Yeah, there's always a way around something. And the other one, Alvin Hooks was a young airman that came in from Georgia. And one day he's fishing in his pockets and a huge wad of the script pops out. And so that we take him up and get him a bank account so that he can deposit his money because we were being paid. And so then about a month later, he says, how do I send my money to my mom? Because she can't do the scripts, but
Right.
it has to be changed to dollars. And so we showed him how to write a check, and we gave it to him. And didn't think anything about it. And he comes back from lunch all mad. We can see he's mad. What's wrong? He says, they wouldn't take it. I said, who wouldn't take it? The bank. I said, you got to mail it to your mother. And then she's got to come all the way here to get it? No, we had to sit down and explain to him how checking worked and banks worked. And it wasn't because he was thick. It was because he'd never done it, and he was a little naive.
Well, you know, and I was in the Marine Corps, and I know they came up with it called the Marine Corps Institute, and it was all these little classes you could take, and one of them was personal finance.
Yes, yeah.
So, all right. Well, is there anything else you want to share?
No, I want to thank you for inviting me here.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to share your story. It's very important that we get these because it's a very real part of our history, and we can't deny it anymore.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, then, thank you, and happy Thanksgiving.
Oh, same to you.